Right now, at the edge of a pond within a mile of you, it is standing in the shallows like a row of brown corn dogs on sticks. A tall green blade, a fat brown seed head, dense and velvety, the shape a child would draw if you said cattail. You have seen 10,000 of them. You have never once thought of them as dinner. But that single plant, standing in the mud, is not one food. It is four. Its root is flour, a starch so dense you could bake bread with it. Its spring shoot is a vegetable you can eat like asparagus. Its golden pollen is a protein-rich flour you can shake into a bag by the handful. And its leaves and gel have been packed onto wounds as a field bandage for thousands of years. Flour, vegetable, protein, and a dressing for a cut, from one weed, standing free, in a ditch. Keep that plant in your mind, because it fed this entire continent for longer than farming has existed. And in a single century, we did something to it stranger than any ban. We didn't outlaw it. We drained the ground it grows in, and called that progress. Let's be clear about what this is not. This is not a rare plant. It grows at the edge of nearly every pond, ditch, marsh, and slow stream on every continent except Antarctica. It is one of the most widespread and recognizable plants on the entire planet. That brown spike is practically the logo of a wetland. And it did not fade because it stopped working, and nobody declared war on it directly. What happened is quieter, and in its way, far more complete. For over 100 years, the land it lives in, the swamp, the marsh, the wetland, was officially treated as worthless, as a wasteland to be dried out and put to proper use, and you cannot forget a plant more thoroughly than by erasing the water it stands in. There's no shadowy company here, no patent, no cover-up, just a policy, a century long, that decided the cattail's whole world was in the way. Let me show you exactly how that happened, and what we threw away when it did. This is the story of the cattail. Welcome to Landfield's Lab. To understand what we lost, you have to see what this plant once was. The first thread is ancient, and it is almost impossible to overstate. Grinding stones tens of thousands of years old, dug out of the ground in Europe, carry the dried starch of this exact plant, meaning humans were pounding cattail root into flour some 30,000 years ago, long before wheat, long before farming, long before civilization as we tell it. This is arguably one of the first foods our species ever processed into bread. Meaning humans were pounding cattail root into flour some 30,000 years ago, long before wheat, long before farming, long before civilization as we tell it. This is arguably one of the first foods our species ever processed into bread. And in North America, it was not a food of last resort. It was a staple. Native nations across the continent built part of their diet around it. The rhizome ground into meal, the young shoots eaten as a vegetable, the pollen tapped into baskets and baked into golden cakes that could be stored, the green flower spikes boiled and eaten like corn on the cob. One plant feeding people in every season of the year. Hold that, because it wasn't only food. This is where it becomes something no supermarket can match. The same plant gave them materials. The long leaves were woven into mats, baskets, chair seats, and the walls and roofs of shelters. The dense brown seed head, dipped in fat, burned as a slow torch. The soft down that bursts from it in autumn stuffed bedding, padded cradle boards, and served as a natural diaper and even a wound packing. Almost no part of it went unused. Duck hunters built blinds out of its stands. Children ate the sweet shoots straight from the water. There is a reason the naturalist Euell Gibbons famously called the cattail the supermarket of the swamp. It genuinely was one, a store that restocked itself. So how does a supermarket disappear? Not all at once. That's the second thread, and it has a date. Jump to the middle of the 19th century. America is expanding fast and hungry for farmland, and it looks at its marshes and swamps, its cattail country, and sees only mosquitoes, mud, and wasted acreage. So in 1849, 1850, and 1860, Congress passes a series of laws called the Swampland Acts. The deal is blunt. The federal government hands roughly 65 million acres of wetland over to the states on one condition: that they drain it, ditch it, dike it, dry it out, and turn it into cropland. Remember that word, drain, because within a century it would erase more of this plant's habitat than any weed killer ever could. But first, so you'd actually recognize the plant, because there is a look-alike that can hurt you. The result is staggering. Since colonial times, the United States has drained and destroyed more than half of all its wetlands. The lower 48 states went from around 220 million acres of wetland down to roughly 100 million, with the losses running fastest in the middle of the 20th century. An area of marsh larger than some entire states was simply erased. A mature cattail is unmistakable. The danger is in early spring, before the spike appears, when you're after the tender young shoots. At that stage, a cattail shoot can look a great deal like the shoot of an iris. An iris is toxic. Here is the tell that has kept foragers alive for generations. Cattail leaves are rounded, almost oval, where they meet the base, and the whole plant has no smell to speak of. Iris leaves are flat and folded into a flat fan. If you cannot tell those two apart with total certainty, do not harvest. Now the numbers. Start with the root. The cattail rhizome runs somewhere between 30 and 46% starch. Ground into flour, that flour is roughly 80% carbohydrate with a useful 6 to 8% protein, genuinely comparable to the grain flours we build civilizations on. And the roots carry real minerals too, notably calcium, iron, and potassium. There's even a shortcut the old foragers used. Crush the peeled root in cold water, and the starch settles out as a fine white powder that behaves almost exactly like cornstarch, thickening a soup or a stew straight away, and the yield is where it stops being a curiosity and starts being serious. By a classic estimate, a single acre of cattails can produce something on the order of 6,000 pounds of flour in a year. By some measures, more edible starch per acre than potatoes, than rice, than yams. This is not a trivial weed. It is one of the most productive food plants on Earth, and almost nobody knows it. And here's a fact that should stop you. This was almost your grandparents' bread. During the Second World War, American researchers seriously studied cattail as a mass food source. There were plans to turn that swamp starch into flour for soldiers and civilians, and the same plant's fluff was used as a substitute for kapok, stuffed into military life vests when overseas supplies were cut off. The war ended before the flour plan scaled up, and the idea quietly died with it. Hold that, because it tells you this was never fringe. Serious people, under real pressure, looked at this weed and saw a strategic food crop. Then there's the pollen. In late spring, the male part of that spike produces bright yellow pollen in almost absurd quantity. People have baked it into cakes and breads for thousands of years. For a wild food, that combination, abundant, protein-dense, and genuinely pleasant to eat, is almost unheard of. And the medicine, where I'll be careful, because this is where hype usually creeps in. The pollen has a long documented history in Chinese medicine, where it's called pu huang and used traditionally to help stop bleeding. Across many cultures, the plant's gel and its down were pressed onto wounds and burns as a field dressing. That's a genuine worldwide folk tradition, and it lines up with the plant's astringent chemistry. But I want to be straight with you. This is traditional wound care from a time before hospitals. It is not a substitute for real medical treatment, and a serious wound needs a doctor, not a marsh plant. The food story is where this plant's evidence is rock solid. The medicine is history, not a prescription. So if it's this good, this productive, this complete, this ancient, why did it vanish from the American table? Here is the erasure, and it's unlike any other on this channel, because there was no villain and no ban. There was a drainage ditch, Since colonial times, the United States has drained and destroyed more than half of all its wetlands. The lower 48 states went from around 220 million acres of wetland down to roughly 100 million, with the losses running fastest in the middle of the 20th century. An area of marsh larger than some entire states was simply erased. The knowledge doesn't get outlawed, it gets orphaned, because the landscape that carried it is gone. A grandmother can't show a grandchild how to pound cattail flour if the wetland behind the house is now a drainage canal and a soybean field. The cattail didn't lose an argument. It lost its home, and the memory went with the water. Which brings me to the honest part. The very quality that makes the cattail a miracle plant also makes it dangerous in the wrong water. Cattails are extraordinary filters. They suck the poison out of the water and lock it into its own tissue. You do not want to eat the sponge. Now think about where that poison ends up. It concentrates in the roots, in the exact starchy rhizome you would peel and grind into flour. A cattail growing in a roadside ditch, or downstream of a factory, or in a farm pond full of runoff, is doing its job. It's a sponge for lead, cadmium, and whatever else is in that water, and you do not want to eat the sponge. So why has nobody turned this into a real crop, if it out-yields rice? Part of it is simple. You cannot patent a plant that grows free in every ditch on the continent, and there's no recurring profit in a food your customer can pull out of the mud themselves. But the deeper reason is the one we've been circling the whole time. For a century, we decided the cattail's habitat was worth more dead than alive, worth more as a cornfield or a subdivision than as a functioning marsh. There is money in draining a wetland, and none in keeping it. The cattail didn't get out-competed by a better crop. It got out-competed by real estate. And yet, after all of that, it's still here. Harvesting from clean water, the plant gives something in every season. Shoots in spring, spikes in summer, pollen in late spring, and the rhizome year-round, all standing in a ditch you drive past without a glance. If you want the next forgotten plant we pull out of the vault, subscribe, because some of them weren't buried by a villain, or a ban, or a lie. Some of them we simply drained away and forgot we ever needed. Welcome to Landfield's Lab.